I left due to family neglect. Now, my parents suddenly want me back to help and take responsibility for my siblings. Out of the 5, I am the youngest. The next sibling is 7 years older than me, so when I say youngest, I don't mean by a little margin. Growing up, I must admit, I always felt invisible. My parents seemed to believe that since I wasn't ill or struggling with mental health concerns like the rest of my siblings, I didn't require their attention. I don't mean to sound dramatic, but this is the reality. The others were in and out of therapy or hospitals all the time. I, the so-called glass child, was merely there in the meantime. Even if you can see me, you don't pay much attention to me. I was okay with that, for the most part. I read a great deal, played video games, and kept to myself a lot. Since there wasn't really anyone else nearby to amuse me, I learned to do it myself. I didn't have to look after my siblings, at least. Some individuals talk of giving up their childhoods to care for their siblings, but I wasn't in that position. I give credit where credit is due because my parents took care of everything. However, I just went between the cracks because, unlike my brothers, I wasn't creating trouble or experiencing crises all the time. I didn't get any help because I didn't need it. I don't believe my parents intentionally did this. The healthy child becomes an afterthought when you have 4 kids who are always battling health problems. I became the quiet kid who didn't draw attention because my parents were too busy taking care of the others' medical appointments, school meetings, and hospital stays. Not in a tragic, dramatic sense, but rather in a pragmatic, we've got our hands full sense. I was invisible. I wasn't all alone. Mia and Clara were the 2 companions I had when I was younger. We clicked because they and their families were in comparable circumstances. We linked because we knew what it felt like to be disregarded and excluded. They eventually grew closer to me than my biological family ever was. After high school, we remained close, attended college together, graduated together, and finally relocated to a different state because we were inseparable. Using the fragments that our real families were unable to supply, we created our own small family. After I moved out, my parents and I didn't communicate much. We didn't talk much when I was still living there, so that wasn't shocking. Occasionally, my mother would text me, primarily to inquire about my employment or how school was going. Even if our relationship was superficial, it was better than when I was a teenager and we hardly spoke. I didn't ask for much, and I didn't expect much from them either. During one of my mom's phone calls, the disconnect really got to me. Considering that we had never phoned one another, it was unexpected. I could tell right away that something was wrong. About a year had passed since our last phone conversation, when she called to let me know the time and location of one of my sister's funerals. That was the extent of our communication. She called me this time to find out my Thanksgiving arrival time. I didn't even realize they were planning anything, so I was taken aback. We didn't have any significant family customs. I think they attempted to do Thanksgiving or Christmas maybe 3 times in my entire childhood. In my family, it simply didn't exist. I informed her that I had plans beforehand. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't just drop everything and come over because I had plans to go skiing with Mia and Clara. In addition, I would have had to purchase an airline ticket well in advance because I reside 2 states away. My mother, however, pretended that I was simply being challenging. She began guilt-tripping me by claiming that she would be by herself because my dad was traveling 2 hours to visit my brother at the facility where he is housed. I knew how she felt, but she hardly told me and thought I would just appear out of nowhere to cheer her up. She became irate and accused me of not caring about the family when I informed her I couldn't come. She hung up after I reiterated that I already had arrangements. I sat there feeling angry and guilty after the call. Suddenly, I was the bad person for not dropping everything to travel home for Thanksgiving, even though I hadn't heard from them in a very long time. There was nothing about Thanksgiving or wanting to see me as I went over old texts to see if I had missed anything. She expected me to cooperate and just threw it at me at the last minute. Later that evening, I texted her to let her know that I would love to see her and Dad after the new year, but I couldn't make it because I had a ski trip scheduled for Christmas as well. I made an effort to be kind, but she didn't respond. I remained uneasy a few days later. My mother's attempts to blame me for not returning home bothered me for some reason. She guilt-tripped me with an unexpected call, but she never told me they were having Thanksgiving. They seemed to think I could read their minds. I had already moved on and was preparing for the ski trip by that point. Clara, Mia, and I had spent months organizing it, and we were all thrilled. We were eager to unwind because it had been a long time since we had enjoyed a real holiday. Suddenly, I received an SMS from my father. I thought that was significant because he doesn't text me very often. Rather, he threatened to stop funding my college education if I didn't return home for Christmas. Since I graduated years ago, I initially chuckled. Which payments? I had to read the material again to make sure I wasn't missing anything because it was so arbitrary. I assumed he was referring to one of my siblings or was simply confused. Reminding him that I had already graduated, I texted him back. I also advised him to check his bank account because he might be duped if he believed he was still paying for my tuition. I assumed that would be the end of it and that when he found out I was no longer enrolled in school, he would feel ashamed. However, a few hours later, he texted me again, accusing me of being ungrateful and self-centered. He blasted me for not appreciating all of the sacrifices they had made for me and my brothers. To begin with, I never made any requests of them. Second, my grandma was the one who paid for my college, thus I was unaware that they were obligated to do so. She handled everything herself because she had made it clear to me that she didn't want my parents interfering with my schooling. I didn't even know what my dad was discussing. By now, I was a little angry. I understand if they're under stress with my siblings, but accusing me of something they didn't even do? That's a completely different level. I'm sorry you feel that way, but Grandma paid for my college. I'm happy to catch up after the holidays, but I already have plans, I replied by text, trying to be as courteous as possible. That should have put an end to it, but it didn't. My dad went all drama mode and texted me about how I've left the family, how I'm abandoning them, and that he's done supporting me if I don't try. By now, all I could do was stare at my phone and wonder, what's going on? Abandon the family? They hardly noticed that I had been living alone for years. Now, all of a sudden, I'm the villain because I won't abandon everything and return in time for Christmas. I couldn't stop thinking about it, even though I wanted to dismiss it. My anger increased as I gave it more thought. It was somehow my duty to make things better the moment they needed something, even if they hadn't spoken to me in months and hadn't bothered to check in or ask how I was doing. I was meant to be their fallback option, or something. To vent, I called Clara and Mia. It sounded like my parents were just using me as a guilt trip, and that was what they both said. Mia claimed that rather than wanting to see me, they most likely wanted me back for Christmas so they wouldn't feel guilty about it. As usual, Clara didn't mince words and replied bluntly, "Screw them. You don't owe them anything." My phone buzzed as I was lying there, so I chose to sleep on it and wait for it to cool down before answering again. Once more, it was my father. I felt numb as I read the brief and icy email this time. "If you don't come home, don't bother coming back at all." How did we arrive here? How did we go from months of not communicating to them essentially rejecting me because I wasn't attending Christmas? It didn't seem real at all. I spent a lot of time looking at the message. I wanted to retaliate by saying something unpleasant. For all the times they disregarded me and made me feel as like I didn't even belong in that house, I wanted to confront them. Rather, I remained silent. I laid over, put my phone down, and attempted to fall asleep. Before the holidays, I didn't want to be drawn into a major family dispute. The accusations, guilt trips, and whatever else they were going to throw at me were things I didn't want to deal with. I simply left it. I woke up the following day to more texts, this time from my mother. She said little more than that they were disappointed in me, didn't know why I was acting so aloof, and hoped I would reconsider. I couldn't help but chuckle because distant wasn't even close to describing it. They were only now realizing that I had been aloof throughout my life. Once more, I disregarded the texts and concentrated on preparing for the ski trip. I must admit that I was as excited as Mia and Clara were. It seemed like the ideal way to get away from all the family drama. I didn't think of my parents for the first time in a long time until we got on the road. I didn't feel depressed or guilty. I simply felt liberated. Naturally, though, peace couldn't last forever. I was about to get over it when my mother sent me another message, in the middle of the journey this time. She was not going to give up. They would have to start making decisions about the future without me, something I wouldn't enjoy, she warned, if I didn't return home soon. At that moment it became clear. There was more in store for them than Christmas. Perhaps it had to do with the house or one of my brothers. I had no idea why they were pushing so hard, but all of a sudden it became clear. They wanted me back for a more significant reason than simply having me around for the holidays. That insight was like a kick to the gut. I always assumed they were simply being needy or lonely. It was never about me, though. Not at all. What they could obtain from me was the main concern. I was finished. I assumed that everything would settle down after my parents' attempt to guilt trip me. I chose to ignore their texts, go on the ski trip, and concentrate on the fact that I was an independent person with my own goals in life. I refused to be dragged back into their world of expectations and guilt. Naturally, though, it wasn't that easy. After returning home and getting used to my routine, I got a message from Jake, my older brother. Jake and I hadn't spoken for months, so maybe not longer. I always imagined that Jake could have some understanding of me as a child. I reasoned that since he wasn't as ill as my other brothers, we may have had more. However, he was constantly too preoccupied with his own affairs. In any case, I was taken aback when I saw his name appear on my phone. His message was straightforward. "Hey, we need to talk." I wasn't feeling particularly dramatic about my family, but I wasn't sure what he wanted. I replied to the text. "Roughly what?" He gave me a call a short while later. I contemplated responding, but my curiosity overcame me. He jumped right into it as I picked up the phone, before I could even say hi. "Mom and Dad have discussed designating you as one of the boys' legal guardians when they are away." I nearly dropped the phone, I promise. For a few seconds, I just sat there in shock, my heart pounding. Was this a prank of some sort? Will they just throw this responsibility on me after all these years of hardly being involved in my life? I managed to ask, "What the hell are you talking about?" At last. Jake sighed like I was the one who was being irrational. "You know how things are with Mom and Dad. They've got a lot on their plate with the other boys, and they're not going to be around forever. They need to know someone's going to step up and take care of things when they're gone." I could feel the heat rising in my body. Jake didn't seem to get why I was outraged. "And they think that someone is me? After everything? After all the ignoring and guilt tripping, they just assume I'm going to drop everything and take over their mess? Look, I know it's a lot, but you're the only one who's really stable. The rest of us, we've got our own issues." It nearly made me chuckle. "Yeah, well, maybe you guys should have thought about that before now. I didn't even know this was a thing. They never told me they were going to talk to you about it," he stated, "but I figured you should know before they tried to spring it on you." I was enraged. It was no longer simply about Thanksgiving or Christmas. This was larger. They hadn't even considered talking to me until now, when it was convenient for them, and they were planning something long-term. They wanted me to take over as the responsible party after we hadn't communicated for years? Simply put, no. Trying to make sense of it, I said, "So what? They've been discussing this behind my back? Like they just decided I'd take on the responsibility without even asking me?" "Yeah, pretty much," said Jake. "They've been planning for a while." Sitting quietly, I stared at the wall while I tried to take it all in. Although I knew it wasn't really Jake's fault, I still felt like screaming at him. He was only the messenger. However, that didn't alter the reality that my parents were going to give me the heaviest possible slap. They wanted me to spend the rest of my life cleaning up after them, not just doing them a favor. I was done being invisible, but I most definitely wasn't going to be their fallback option at this point. More than anything else, I felt defeated and wondered, so what am I supposed to do? Just drop my whole life and move back home? Give up everything I've worked for? Jake had no response to that. He made an effort to discuss how difficult it was for our parents to handle everything while taking care of my brothers. I didn't care though. Because I wasn't an issue, I had been ignored my entire life. Since I was the only one with my life together, they now wanted to take advantage of me. It was unfair. I interrupted him in the middle of his statement and stated, "I'm not doing it. I will not serve as their fallback. They haven't cared about me for the past 25 years, and they have no right to hold me accountable for everyone now." After a moment of silence, Jake remarked, "I understand, I do, but you're still a member of the family." I wanted to shout when I heard that term. Family. Yes, I was a member of the family, but only when it suited them and only when they were in need. They showed no concern for my well-being or need for assistance when I was a child. But all of a sudden, they needed me because they were afraid of what lay ahead. I said, "Tell them I'm not interested. And don't give me another call about this." Before Jake could answer, I hung up and sat there, attempting to relax while I stared at the phone. It seemed as though my entire existence had been building to this point, when I had finally had enough. Enough of being exploited after being ignored, enough of manipulative texts, enough of guilt trips. Their safety net wasn't going to be me. Jake and my dad didn't get in touch for a few days. They seemed to be waiting for me to change my mind, come to my senses, and become the excellent daughter they had suddenly determined I should be. However, I had no intention of moving. Since I was the only one left standing, I wasn't going to allow them to vent their troubles on me. A letter then arrived in the mail. My mother gave it to me. As if we were living in the 1800s or something, she had sent a letter without even calling. The lengthy, meandering letter was chock full of the same guilt-tripping nonsense I had heard before. She continued by describing how difficult things were for them, how much they needed me, and how they were unsure of what they would do without my assistance. But the last part was what truly annoyed me. "Olivia, we're not asking for much," my mother wrote. "All we need to know is that someone will take care of the family while we are away. That's when I understood the true significance of this. They showed no concern for me. All that mattered to them was that their mess be cleaned up after they left. Because they loved or missed me, they didn't want me back in their life. Since I was the only one who hadn't broken, they wanted me since I was practical. I tossed the letter in the trash after crumpling it up. I was finished. First update. I believed I had reached my breaking point after receiving that letter from my mother. What more was there for them to show me that I hadn't previously seen? I had already had enough of their manipulations, guilt trips, and attempts to hold me accountable for their disaster. Naturally, though, I was mistaken. It wasn't finished. Not even close. I received another call, this time from an unfamiliar number, a week or two after I threw away the letter. Something in me was intriguing, but I nearly didn't pick up. Given that I had been ignoring their number, it could have been Jake once more or one of my parents attempting a different one. In any case, I picked up. Hi Olivia, this is Sarah. One of my sisters is Sarah. We never had a close relationship. She had to deal with hospitals, therapists, and everything else on her own. Yes, I felt sorry for her as a child, but I didn't know her well. It felt unusual to hear from her now, after everything, since we were essentially strangers sharing a house. I said, hey, unsure of the direction things were taking. Look, she began, I know that things between you and your parents have been a little difficult, but I really need you to pay attention to what I have to say. Already, I could feel my stomach dropping. I thought, more guilt, more attempts to pull me back in. Here we go. What is it? I tried to seem neutral as I inquired, but I was already preparing myself for whatever nonsense was about to happen. They're not doing well, she stated after taking a long breath. I mean, not doing well at all. The fact that no one is stepping forward to help with the boys is making them panic as Dad's health rapidly deteriorates. Olivia, they are afraid. They are unsure on what to do. I remained silent for a while. I did care. It wasn't that I didn't. I didn't want my parents or anyone else to suffer. However, I couldn't just go in and make things right for them after everything, after years of them not caring about me. Their band-aid was not me. With caution, I added, I'm sorry to hear that, but I can't just drop everything. I too have a life, Sarah. I could tell she was frustrated by the way she sighed. I understand that, but the only one who can assist is you. You know what's happening with me and the others, and Jake is barely able to hold himself together. Olivia, there isn't anyone else? I retorted, feeling my rage rising once more. Desperate because they ignored this for years. They believed that everything would simply go away, so they allowed stuff to accumulate. And now I'm responsible because I'm the one who got out and made a living for myself? Sarah, that is unfair. She said, I know it's unfair, but this is where we are. They require assistance. There it was once more, the same old shame, the same old story. They always managed to pull me back, regardless of what I did or how far I tried to get away from it. I could sense the tension rising within me, the animosity and frustration that had been building for years now reaching a head. I spoke more sharply than I meant to when I said, I'm not doing it. It is not my intention to tidy up their mess. They didn't give a damn about me when I was a child, and they certainly don't get to visit me now only for the sake of convenience. I have a life of my own. They must solve this problem on their own. When Sarah spoke once more, I could hear the pain in her voice. I understand, Olivia. I do. However, this isn't about me or you. Her words. It's about the family. It's about what's going to happen to the boys when they're gone. If we don't step up, who will? That struck me hard because it made me understand how imprisoned we all were, not because I felt suddenly guilty. After neglecting and ignoring me for years, my parents were suddenly attempting to exploit me as a means of escape. What about my siblings? Like me, they were ensnared in the center of everything. They simply lacked the strength to defend themselves. I repeated, I'm sorry, but this time I was softer. But I can't. I won't. She paused for a long time, and I could hear her displeasure over the phone. But this time, I wasn't going to give in. I was unable to. At last, she answered, okay, in a flat voice. Before I could finish, she hung up, saying, I'll tell them. For a while, I just sat there and stared at my phone, feeling guilty and relieved at the same time. I was aware that I owed my parents nothing. It still stung though. Knowing that I had no control over my family's disintegration pained. Or perhaps I wasn't helpless. I was simply unwilling to give up my own interests for them anymore. My mother sent me another letter a few days later. It was considerably worse this time. She skipped the small talk and went right to the guilt trip. She expressed her disappointment at me in her letter, saying that I was failing the family and that she couldn't believe I would abandon them when they needed me most. She rambled on about how difficult it was for her and my dad, how much they had given up for us, and how she didn't know what she had done to earn such a self-centered kid. It was cruel. And it worked for a moment. I had the same old, well-known sting of guilt that I had experienced throughout my entire childhood. However, I then recalled all the years I had been invisible, the times they had forgotten about me, and the times I had needed them but they had failed to show up. I understood that they weren't in need of assistance. Control was at issue here. In order to make me feel as though I owed them something, they attempted to entice me back into their web. However, I no longer owed them anything. Like the last letter, I ripped it up and threw it in the garbage. I was finished. I had had enough of being their pawn. I had had enough of being manipulated by them. Now that I had my own life, I wasn't going to let them take it away. I banned their numbers the following day. To be safe, I also blocked Jake. Although it wasn't a simple choice, it was the only one that seemed correct. They couldn't continue to bring me down and make me feel like I was to blame for their issues. They had to live with the decisions they had made. I felt free for the first time in a long time. Second update. It was a relief to block their numbers, as if a burdensome burden had been removed. I was in charge of the issue for the first time. I wasn't sitting there anticipating a surprise call from Jake or another guilt-tripping message from my mom. It was calm and quiet. Naturally, though, that didn't last. A knock on my door occurred a few weeks later. I assumed it might be a delivery, but I wasn't expecting anyone. My mother, standing on my porch as if she had every right to be there, was there when I opened the door. How she found me is a mystery to me. Although I hadn't been hiding, I didn't anticipate her showing up at my house. She appeared older, I suppose, or perhaps it was simply the tension. In any case, it was evident to me that she had not had an easy time. I didn't feel sorry for her though, no more. "Why are you in this place?" I asked, trying to sound as composed as possible. She took a while to respond. She simply remained there, staring at me as though she hadn't seen me before. At last she said something. "Olivia, we need to talk." I let out a sigh. "No, we don't at all. Everything I needed to say has been spoken. I've already decided." She took a step forward as if she were about to enter, but I blocked her path by standing in the doorway. I didn't want to give in to her and allow this to become just another guilt trip. She said in a gentler voice, "Please, just listen. Your dad is becoming worse. We don't know how long he has left, and he keeps going in and out of the hospital. Olivia, I'm at a loss for what to do." The card she had been waiting to play was finally there. The card that says, "Your father is dying." Although she didn't state it directly, I could tell she was implying it. I'm not cold-hearted. I didn't want my father to be in pain. However, I couldn't just abandon everything and run to their side after everything they had done to me. "I'm sorry," I murmured, attempting to sound calm. "But this isn't my problem. You and Dad have had years to figure this out. You can't just show up now and expect me to fix everything." She gave me the impression that I had slapped her. "I'm not asking you to fix anything, I just need you to be there for the family." "For the family?" I said again, nearly giggling. "What family? The one that ignored me for 25 years? The one that only talks to me when they need something? That's not a family, Mom. That's just manipulation." Her eyes grew wide, and I briefly believed she was going to disagree with me. Instead, she simply broke down in tears, right outside my door. I had no idea what to do when she started crying. I couldn't stand by and watch her cry, but I also couldn't invite her inside. "Look," I continued, now speaking more softly. "I get that this is hard for you. I really do. But I'm not your backup plan. I'm not the person who's going to come in and make everything okay. You made your choices, and now you have to deal with them." She looked up at me after wiping her eyes. I could see the despair beginning to give way to rage. "We did the best we could, Olivia. You don't understand what it was like, raising all of you, dealing with everything. We didn't have time for you because we were trying to keep everyone else alive." The excuse was there. I had heard the same justification countless times before. I stated, "And that's not my fault," in a firmer tone. "You made the choice to have 5 kids. You made the choice to focus on everyone else and leave me behind. That was your decision, not mine. And now you're trying to make me feel guilty for it. I won't do it, Mom. I won't." She stared at me for a long time without saying anything, as if she had forgotten who I was. Perhaps she didn't. Perhaps because I wasn't causing any issue, she still thought of me as the tiny child she could ignore. However, I was no longer that child. I had had enough of being invisible. At last she said something. So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on us? I gave a headshake. Number, you turned your back on me a long time ago. I'm just finally walking away. Regarding that, she had nothing to say. She simply turned and left, making her way back to her vehicle. I experienced a peculiar spectrum of feelings as I watched her leave. There was a sad part of me, to be sure, but the majority of me felt liberated, as if I had finally let go of something I had been holding onto for years, something I should have done years ago. I went back inside after she left and sat down to attempt to take in what had just transpired. I had lost my anger. I wasn't even injured. I had just finished. I'm over the manipulation, the guilt, and the never-ending sense that I'm not good enough. They weren't going to rely on me. I wasn't going to be the last thing they tried. I wasn't going to let them bring me down any longer. I had my own life to live. It was quiet for the following few weeks. I received no correspondence, no calls, and nothing else. To be honest, I hadn't felt this good in a long time. I concentrated on my life, my friends, and my job. I wasn't watching over my shoulder to see when they would send me another message. I had moved past the shadow of their expectations. Then, perhaps a month later, I received an email from Jake, not my parents. It was brief, just a few sentences, but it conveyed all the information I required. Dad died last night. I believed you ought to be aware. I looked at the email for a while, unsure of how to react. I knew this would happen, so I wasn't shocked. However, I also didn't feel depressed. To be honest, I didn't feel anything. I considered answering. I considered giving Jake a call to see how he was doing and perhaps to give my sympathy. I later understood, however, that this was really a new phase in the same cycle, another opportunity for them to re-engage me. And this time, I wasn't going to be duped. Without responding, I dismissed the email and carried on with my day. I had finally come to terms with the fact that I was no longer a part of their universe. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.